Welcome back to another episode of Fathers and Sons. Hey, Luke, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Dad?
I'm doing good. Today, we're excited. We're talking about a couple of great works of literature. We'll be talking about arguably William Shakespeare's greatest, or at least his most popular play, Hamlet, as well as one of the highest grossing Disney films, probably the highest grossing 2D cartoon of all time, The
hmm
Lion King, which you and I both love a lot. And these are riffs on the same plot or a similar plot where a royal son loses his father, his king father, and is tasked by a ghost of his father to sort of take action, to take back or to take revenge against his father's killer, in very sort of different ways against a traitorous uncle in both cases. Hamlet, of course, is a tragedy. And so everyone basically in the play exhibits in true Shakespearean fashion a fatal flaw. There's a lot of death and destruction and sadness. The Lion King, as we've discussed, and we'll talk more about this, is sort of like, what if Hamlet, what if everything went right and everybody made better choices
Yeah, it's
in
written.
Hamlet?
It's like it was written by my daughter River, who hates any bad things happen.
But what if people actually learned lessons in Hamlet and made good choices? But they do have sort of some things in common. There's some elements of heroic ideals in both, and they do have some plot elements in common, and actually some really interesting character parallels as well. And they do have this father-son, and we're going to try to tease out some of the things maybe that we as dads, as sons, as family members, maybe we can learn some questions maybe that we have from these two stories. So why don't you go ahead and recap the two plots? Maybe tell us some of the similarities and some of the differences, and then we'll get into some of the questions we've got.
Yeah, for sure. Before I jump into that, a little bit of background, like tiny bit. I find this stuff interesting. It's not exactly on topic for our podcast, but it's fun. So Hamlet, right, is story ostensibly written by Shakespeare, and The Lion King is based to some extent on Hamlet. But Shakespeare didn't invent this. This is an ancient story, potentially based off of a Nordic legend. I know in your notes you wrote about Amleth,
Yep.
very similar kind of plot. And Hamlet was so well known, such a well-known story at the time of that same name, that Shakespeare actually has in different versions of this play, like different titles, and they're all just different versions of the name Hamlet. And we know that his son kind of had a name similar to Hamlet. It was a very well-known
Hamnet.
Hamnet. Yep. Very
Yeah.
well-known both plot and character at the time. And it is still a very well-known plot and a very common plot. So, we're going to talk about The Lion King, but there are other stories that follow the same thing. I was listening to one of Brandon Sanderson's writing lectures where he talks about his favorite book, which is Dune.
Yeah.
And Dune is just Hamlet. It's the same plot.
Yeah.
So
Very interesting.
we'll talk. I think it's important to recognize that just because these are sort of eternal plot truths, if you can call
Sure.
them that, right? Yeah.
A lot to be learned from those kinds of archetypal. Look, these relationships are deeply rooted in our society, and I think a lot of the lessons really do have application.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's talk story for a minute, and we can take some tangents if we want to. First of all, the central conflict of both of these stories comes from the death of a royal father. So we don't see this happen in Hamlet, and that contributes a lot to the dramatic irony, which is the central conflict of the play. Dramatic irony is when you know something that the characters don't know. So you know that someone has done something and the characters don't know it. So we know Hamlet's a little bit weird because they often know things that we don't. So it's kind of flipped on its head. But in
Yeah.
Lion King, we know that Scar kills Mufasa, even though Simba doesn't. So in both cases, the royal father dies. So Claudius and Scar are the first characters to talk about. They are character analogs. They're the uncle of the main character. And they're
Right.
both they're the traitor characters. Second set of character analogs is Simba and Hamlet. One thing I find really interesting about this analog, Hamlet is in literary history. Sometimes he's called like the first self-conscious man. He's one of the first characters that's reflective, that monologues, that talks about, what he's thinking. And Simba, the word Simba means lion in Swahili.
In
So
Swahili.
there is a sense that, Simba is the self. He is the all-encompassing self. He's representative of each of us, and he's self-reflective as well. So I kind of like that analog as well. In any case, the third set of character analogs here are the parents. Or the fathers. So you've got Mufasa, voiced by James Earl Jones, who we've talked about before in
Darth
our
Vader.
Star Wars episode. Darth Vader. He's both the worst dad of all time and the best dad of all time. So we got Mufasa, and then his analog is Old Hamlet, who's the king of Denmark. We never meet Old Hamlet in his corporeal form. We meet him as a ghost, we think. There's some uncertainty, but we think it's him. So Claudius/Scar kills Mufasa/Old Hamlet and then seizes power. Now, there's a little bit of a divergence plot-wise here, but in both stories, the prince is at some point haunted by their father. For young Hamlet, it happens at the very beginning of the plot. He is called to action by his father. And the call to action in this story is revenge. Old Hamlet tells him, "Take vengeance on your uncle who has murdered me."
That's right.
The call to action in The Lion King is different. It's still Mufasa, but it's not revenge, it's restitution.
And it comes much later in
later.
in the story.
It comes, well, I'll caveat that. It comes much later in sort of chronology of the way the story is presented. But I would argue that, like, story-wise, they actually happen at the same time. It's just that we don't see the first half of the story with Hamlet. Shakespeare skips it. Right? Yeah. Simba, we see the death, we see the escape, we see all of the part where he's off in the jungle, which is his Wittenberg.
There's another key difference between the plots, and I don't know if you were going to get to this or not, but in The Lion King, Simba believes that he is the cause of his father's death.
Yeah.
And in Hamlet, that's not the case. I watched the Kenneth Branagh version, and it's brilliant. I mean, the opening scene when they're in the court of, Claudius has become the king. He's married Hamlet's mother. And so he is just distraught by his mother's remarriage to Claudius, his uncle. But there's no suggestion that he feels responsible for his father's death. He's just very angry and very disappointed in his mother. And of course, disappointed that he considers his uncle a usurper, but he doesn't believe that he himself is responsible for the death.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super important. So both characters experience an exile or sort of a delay in their actions. And for Simba, a lot of the exile and the delay is coming from exactly what you're talking about. Scar tells him to run away and never return. And he does. He runs away, lives with Timon and Pumbaa in the jungle, and he has the whole Hakuna Matata arc, means no worries, which is interesting because this is paralleled a little bit by Hamlet. Both characters experience an extreme level of struggle with action. Neither one of them want to take the next step towards either revenge or restitution.
Yeah.
Hamlet has several sort of exile/delay moments. I mean, he's coming back from Wittenberg, from Switzerland at the beginning of the play, but he also is exiled for a minute to England with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. There's like an assassination plot on his life. And then I think this is a really funny thing that Shakespeare did, but he succeeds in throwing off this plot to kill him halfway through the play. And then there's a part where he talks about throwing in with a bunch of pirates that we never see, but It sounds like one of the most interesting things that happens in the story.
Well, anyway, two points I want to make very quickly. We probably have way more to talk about here than we can get done in like 45 minutes. I think it's super important. You mentioned that Hamlet is often referred to as the first sort of introspective or the first modern man. Mm-hmm. I also think it's important to recognize that Simba is also a really good analog, I think, for modern young people. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot that can be learned about the problems and the challenges that young people face today in both of these characters. The feelings of inadequacy, the feelings of indecision, of not knowing who you are and not knowing sort of the direction that you should take to fulfill kind of your destiny and the you know, claim the good things, claim your privileges in life, right? So that's number one. And I think we'll come back to that. Two, Hamlet is, for all of his indecision and his inability to act, an extremely talented young man. And you see that throughout the play in sort of these flashes when we'll talk about the play within the play.
Yep.
When the players come to the court and he's able to quote long passages of dramatic works, when he comes back from England and he's had these adventures with the pirates, when he's able to command the loyalty of these other young men, these other students that we just barely get to know, but it's clear that he, even though he believes he does not measure up to his father, which I'm sure we will talk about, he sells himself short.
Yeah.
He chooses not to rise to the level that he could. He chooses not to sort of rise up to this level of kingship that he could actually fulfill. I think that's part of the tragedy to me of Hamlet.
Yeah, I really like that. And that speaks a little bit to what we said at the beginning, that these plays are different takes on the question, different takes on the same question. Hamlet is, what would happen if they made kind of the wrong choice? And Hamlet's answer to his feelings of inadequacy and his, that this too frail flesh would melt, and his angst is murder and
Yeah.
is
or suicide.
suicide. It's succumbing to the grief. It's succumbing to kind of the negative feelings about himself. It's believing that. And Simba's is the opposite. So this is the next kind of step in the plot, and this is the recognition / kind of the identity scene. And you mentioned the play within a play. So for Hamlet, the first chunk of the play is about him struggling, first of all, with the ghost of his father's admonition towards revenge. But it's also hit with him struggling about whether or not it's true, whether or not Claudius actually did kill his father. So he stages this play within a play, and he writes a new piece into the play that has a brother murdering a brother. And he has Claudius watch it, and he watches Claudius for his reaction. Claudius sees this, goes pale as a sheet, and runs off. And so Hamlet says, "Oh, I know that this is true. I know he killed my father." Simba none of his kind of identity recognition, none of the turning point of the movie has to do with the identity of the murderer. It's all about him and his kind of internal struggle to feel good enough. This is when Mufasa comes back and says, "You are my son. You have a destiny to fulfill." Rafiki gets involved as well. And then Simba decides that he's going to go back to the Pride Lands and participate in the restitution of the land. So after this kind of recognition scene in Hamlet, we're skipping over a bunch of stuff because there's so much there. But eventually both characters get to a confrontation with their uncle. Hamlet, interestingly, uses poison as his means of confrontation. He tries to poison his uncle, but there's
the same way his uncle killed his father.
True. Yep. There's a bunch of shenanigans, and Claudius does die, but so does Hamlet. So does Gertrude, Hamlet's mother. So does Laertes, who is Hamlet's sort of foil. He's another young man who is ostensibly fulfilling his potential. He's listening to his father, and he seems like a good young man.
He's active.
He's active, yeah. They all die from poison, as is the way with Shakespearean tragedies. And for Simba, it's very different. He returns back to Pride Rock, confronts Scar, and learns that Scar killed Mufasa and is able to win the fight with Scar. And Simba doesn't actually try to kill Scar originally, but Scar sort of forces his hand and then ends up dying in the end, falls. He's literally overthrown. He's thrown off a cliff and dies. the outcome is opposite in both of these. In Hamlet, Denmark sort of descends into chaos and outside forces have to come in and maintain order. That's Fortinbras, the leader of Norway. And in The Lion King, the Pride Lands are restored, everything's good, happy, and it starts to rain for the first time, which is very symbolic. The Pride Lands under Scar have been, overhunted and they're dry and desiccated. And then when Simba comes back, it starts to rain and order is restored through his rule.
Right.
So same basic story. We've got, the murder of the royal father, the usurpation of power, the prince being haunted, having a crisis of identity, coming back and confronting the usurper, and then opposite endings, unfortunately. Now, super quick note, I just think this is such a fun piece to do. I wanted to just list the characters real quick. So
Yeah.
we've got we talked about 3 of them already. We got Simba and Hamlet, their analogs. We've got Mufasa and Old Hamlet. And we've got Scar and Claudius. Those are kind of the 3 main guys. And then we also have Sarabi, who is Simba's mother, and her analog is Gertrude. These are very different characters, and hopefully we can talk about this a minute later on. We've also got the love interest. So in Simba, in The Lion King, it's Nala, and then we have Ophelia in Hamlet. Again, different characters.
Extremely tragic character in Hamlet. Yeah.
I mean, all of these guys are. So I was also thinking about Zazu and Polonius. They're both kind of the major domo for the ruler. And Polonius is a tragic character too. When you watch the play, he's always reminded me of C-3PO.
Yeah.
He's kind of the bumbling, annoying old fool.
You just don't like Polonius.
You don't really like him. But
you like Ophelia.
You do. But he's still tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. Polonius is he grates on you. He's sort of kind of a cloying figure who tries to ingratiate himself to Claudius, and he doesn't give very good advice, and he's not very nice to his daughter. And so he's not, in my view, when I sort of read the play most recently, didn't have a tremendous amount of sympathy for Polonius.
Fair enough.
He's a bit underhanded. Of course, you don't want the old man to die, which he does. Hamlet kills him. And that's why he's actually spirited off to England. That's sort of the forcing event that causes the king to send him off to England. But yeah, he is a tragic figure as well.
Then we've got 2 more analogs I just wanted to touch on real quick. We've got Timon and Pumbaa, great characters, everybody's favorites, and they are
so funny.
Analogous with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which if any of our listeners, if we have any listeners, have ever read Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, this is the Lion King 1.5 of Hamlet. And I think that is such a fun comparison. That Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is another play by a different playwright, a modern playwright. And Lion King 1.5 is a different movie, but super fun. And then one last character, and this one's really interesting to me, is Rafiki and Yorick. Yorick is not actually a character in Hamlet. He is the skull, the famous skull. But he was the fool. He was old Hamlet's fool. In a lot of Shakespeare's plays, there is a fool character who is, in many cases, the wisest character in the play and says good things through madness. But Hamlet's fool, tellingly, is dead. He's gone. Simba, though, has his fool. He has Rafiki, who completely matches the profile of a fool in the Shakespearean sense. He says things
in the sense of a truth teller. Right?
He says things you think are mad, but are actually very valuable.
That's right. I mean, when we did the episode on King Lear, the fool played remarkable role in that play. He was one of the only characters who could actually speak truth to King Lear, especially as he became more and more angry and descended into madness himself. The fool could speak truth to Lear and to the audience about what was happening. Hamlet lacks that. He lacks a living mentor. I think this is one point that you wrote in the notes. He lacks a living mentor, a living father figure, a living mentor who can help him with some of the decisions that he is facing. And so he's basically on his own to make some of these decisions. Whereas in The Lion King, Rafiki plays that role and is able, even in the absence of Mufasa, Rafiki does play that role.
Yeah. One last thing I'll say about this. In Hamlet, in the play, Hamlet actually refers to Yorick as an erstwhile father figure.
That's
When
right.
Hamlet was young, he talks about riding on Yorick's back, getting a piggyback ride. And so, in a way, Hamlet has lost two fathers. He's lost his father and his father figure, whereas Simba lost his father, but still has that, like you said, has that father figure. So that's the recap. There's lots more to say, obviously, but that's the basic idea behind this play or this story. So we have some questions that we wanted to talk through about this, but before we get into that, any other things you want to add about the plot?
Now let's get into the questions. I think you've got some good ones listed here.
All right. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is really just how these two stories present the importance of a father's presence in childhood and what influenced the relationship between father and son as kids has on their life. It's a little hard to answer with Hamlet because all the information we get is Hamlet talking about it after the fact. But I think it's still an important question. And I've shared this with you, but I've always had this like image in my mind of a small father versus a large father. And
Yeah.
this has nothing to do with actual size. The way I've always actually thought about this is with chairs, oddly enough. A large father to me is someone you walk into their study and they're sitting in this like high-backed, stiff wooden chair, and they're working on stuff all the time and they don't pay much attention to their kids. They're very involved in whatever they want to be involved with. And a small father, you walk into their office, they're sitting in like a creaky old rolling chair. They lean back, say, "Hey, how's it going? What's going on? What can I do for you?" And to
Hmm.
me, Mufasa is the quintessential small father, and old Hamlet is the quintessential large father. Everything we get
Yeah.
from young Hamlet's point of view about his dad is admiration and devotion, but it's all like, he was a military man. I really think he was awesome and I admire him, but there's no rolling around in the dirt like Mufasa and Simba.
Yeah.
So my question, and maybe you have some thoughts about this, but how does it influence the kids' motivation and their trajectory in life to have those two different types of fathers?
Yeah. I mean, I noticed the same dynamic, I think. I focused a lot on this when I read Hamlet, some of the ways that Hamlet described his father. Obviously, we don't see anything about the relationship, the day to day,
Mm-hmm.
but some of the descriptions that Hamlet gives of his father. He says, "We will never see his like. My uncle is no more like my father than I to Hercules."
Yeah,
Now,
that's a good one.
now at first blush, he's praising his father, but he's also setting up this gulf between him and his father. He's basically saying, "I will never be like my father. I'll never reach there." Whereas in The Lion King, there's this whole sequence. Um, you remember the part where Simba and Nala, when they're cubs, they go to the Shadowlands. They go to
Mm-hmm.
the place where the hyenas live, the elephant graveyard. And that's bad. They're not supposed to go there. Mufasa has to come and save them. And he does. And Simba gets in trouble. But you can tell a couple of things about Mufasa's parenting style. First of all, he's not going to allow his son to make a mistake that is so bad that he's going to fall into ruin. He's going, to provide him a safety net. He's going to physically go and rescue his son. He's going to correct his son. He says, "I need to teach my son a lesson." Right, and
Yeah.
he's sitting there. He's severe, and he speaks directly to his son. He teaches him a lesson. He teaches him that he put Nala, this other little cub, in danger, but he describes the reason for that in very personal terms. And then right after that, they wrestle. right? He shows an increase of love after he corrects his son. And so it's just a very personal example of parenting. So you kind of contrast those things. And then another thing he does is he tells his son, you're going to have to do everything that I do. All of this is going to be yours. You are going to have to stand in my shoes. And there's a scene where he actually puts his paw in his paw print. And so all of the imagery is about sort of rising into that role.
Yeah.
So I think the two stories kind of lay out this different model for fatherhood and for parenting.
I love that. The scene that comes to mind for me in The Lion King, and I think we may dwell a little more on Mufasa's parenting than old Hamlet because it is a better model. But when Simba and Nala are in the elephant graveyard and the hyenas are coming at them, Simba tries to roar
Yeah.
and he can't. It's just like,
Yeah.
the little meow. And then he opens his mouth and you think he roars, but then you see Mufasa is standing behind
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
That's such an iconic moment. And I think it's an important moment for fathers to recognize because we know that Simba's trying to roar. I mean, if you take roaring as like a symbol of, finding your voice as a kid and finding yourself and confidence, we know he's trying to do that because that is what Mufasa does. He's seen his
Yeah.
dad do it before,
Yeah.
but he isn't quite able to. And so sometimes as a father, you do have to step in and you do have to help the kid find that kind of voice. This actually brings me pretty easily to the next question, which is how we can do that. How can fathers, pass on goodness to their children? And the way that I've been thinking about this is the idea of an inheritance versus a debt. So to me, Simba does have an inheritance. He inherits his father's bravery, courage, all of the good memories, the lessons he was taught. Whereas Hamlet, when his father dies, he receives a debt instead. Denmark is already a poisoned kingdom. It's
Yeah.
political turmoil. I mean, I've been thinking about this. Like, we often accept stories just at face value. But if you think about it a little further, Polonius was old Hamlet's advisor first. So he had this, kind of slimy, squeamish guy first, whereas Mufasa picked Zazu, and Zazu is brave enough to tell lions what to do.
Yeah.
Even at the cost, he's brave enough to keep his moral compass, even at the cost of potentially. I mean, at one point, Scar literally eats him, puts him in his mouth because he won't shut up about his moral code.
Yeah.
And Denmark's poisoned in other ways. Hamlet's father basically passes debt on to Hamlet, and then he exacerbates it by returning as a ghost and saying, "Avenge me." Not just avenge me. Let me read the quote. So this is Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 5, or sorry, line 23 through 25. He says, "If thou didst ever thy dear father love, revenge his most foul and unnatural murder." So not only does he say, "Avenge me," he says, "If you don't, you never loved me." It's like
Yeah.
narcissistic manipulation of the highest order.
Extreme. Yeah.
Yeah. So, tell me your thoughts about this, this idea of inheritance versus debt.
Well, let me riff off of what I said before, because I could be understood to be suggesting that a son or a child needs to, step into the shoes of his father or his parent or her parent as a measure of success. And that's not really what I'm suggesting, because by contrast to what you just described, old Hamlet focusing on himself and this sort of egotistical, narcissistic approach, Hamlet's ghost told young Hamlet, look to the past, right? Look only to the past.
Mhm.
Avenge
Yeah,
me,
that's true.
right? And in the Kenneth Branagh version, it's really kind of creepy because the actor who plays old Hamlet has these like blue eyes that are almost white. They're so like piercing, and you get this sense of this sort of all of the attention focused on the ghost. And there's some doubt maybe in the play about whether the ghost is real or a figment of imagination. But in the movie version, Kenneth Branagh's movie, it is very like a very overwhelming scene. But by contrast, in The Lion King, Mufasa tells Hamlet to remember who he is. He says to him, look to the future. Now you're a son of kings. You're a child of kings. So it's good to remember your past. It's good to remember where you came from, but you got to remember who you are and what your destiny is, right? And so the scene you described about when he was in the elephant graveyard and he was trying to roar and then he roared and it was actually his dad. There's a couple of other scenes where he looks in the water and Rafiki says, I've seen your father, and he says, come follow me. I'll show you where he is. And he looks in the water and he sees a reflection, but it's not actually his father. It's him. So he sees his father in his reflection. And then when he goes back to the pride, people think it's Mufasa. So he's mistaken for his father several times, but he's not his father. He has his own identity. So it's kind of a hybrid. It's kind of a combination of things. So, but then you contrast that to Hamlet. Hamlet is to avenge his father. Everything's focused on his father, but nobody would ever confuse him for his father. So there's this, at once he's totally focused on this sort of narcissistic view of like, I got to fulfill my father's whim. But at the same time, there's this huge gulf. So I think as parents, we have to recognize that we can give our children, and we should be giving our children, a legacy, an inheritance. We should be teaching values, and we should be teaching history, and we should be teaching about who we are and who our people are, and who, the history of our families and all of these things, the things we hold important and dear. But we have to recognize that our children have this future and this capacity and these capabilities that are purely their own. And that's what we need to be enabling and giving capacity to.
Yeah, I love that. The scene where Mufasa returns as the cloud and is this ghost, and the scene where Simba sees himself in the reflection. I did some reading, and apparently this was the most controversial scene of The Lion King and almost make it into the movie, where a lot of people,
Really?
it's too spiritual, like too vague. But I think that is the single best scene in any Disney movie ever. I mean, just to recap, this is after Nala has come and begged with Simba to come back to the Pride Lands and take his place as king. And Simba doesn't know what to do. And this is the part where Rafiki comes out and whacks him in the head, literally whacks him with a stick. So, right, the presence of the fool figure, kind of the pseudo father figure again is there. And
what does he say about that? It's in the past.
Yeah, it's in the past. He does. Yeah, but he makes Simba chase him, right? Chase after him because he's mad. And they start kind of arguing. And Rafiki says, you don't even know who you are. You don't understand, Simba, what I think is you don't understand how amazing you are. You don't see it. So let me show you. And he says, like you said, I've seen your father. Come. And Simba chases after him, looks at the reflection. And Simba says, that's not my father. That's just my reflection. And Rafiki says, look harder.
Look harder.
Yeah. This makes me like tear up every time I think about it. It's so, so important for people to recognize that they are more than what they think they are.
Yeah.
And then Rafiki says Mufasa lives in you. And then we get this whole scene of Mufasa's ghost coming in as like a thundercloud, which is so good. And Mufasa says the same thing. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. So number one, you are more than what you think you are. But he also says you must take your place in the circle of life. And I think this is exactly what you were talking about. Old Hamlet, everything he tells young Hamlet is kill Claudius because he killed me. You have to avenge me. I am the focus here. Whereas Mufasa and Rafiki are trying to teach Simba that he has a place where he can do good. He can give back. He can add to the circle of life, the ever-turning wheel.
That's right.
I love that. And that's the question that I have. Like, how do I teach my kids to both see their identity, their divine potential, and also see that they have so much to give? And I think it comes back to, go ahead.
And this last time I read Hamlet, I'd never noticed this before. I certainly did not notice this when I read and watched, the play when I was a young person. I have no idea if Shakespeare meant to include this, but that divine potential was in Hamlet too,
Yeah.
and it was totally wasted.
Yep.
It was totally missed. And maybe that's what that's what makes every tragedy so sad.
Hmm.
Because we all have that. Every human being has that. Maybe I'm too hard on old Polonius, because he's kind of an annoying old geezer. Maybe I'm kind of an annoying old geezer. We all have that divine potential. We are all more than what we seem, and we can all reach a little bit further. If we look a little bit harder at that reflection and just do a little bit more, we can kind of probably do better. And so I noticed that in Hamlet, like what a talented young man.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought of that either. I love that though. The idea of the tragedy. I mean, Aristotle says it's when everybody makes the wrong choices, but in some ways, what makes it a tragedy is that we can see how cool Hamlet could be. We can see how amazing he would
Yeah.
be. I mean, we've talked about this. Like, if he made different decisions, this would be like, this would be like one of the great myths of good's conquest over evil. But
Yeah, exactly.
he doesn't. It's not even just that he makes the wrong choices. So this is, I don't think we'll have time to get through all this, but this is the real question that I had is Lion King is kind of Hamlet if it went right. So what was different? And I think all of these pieces come together to make Simba into the heroic, conquering Arthurian, dragon slayer, and make Hamlet
Yeah.
into just this tragic character. So, couple of things. First thing, we've kind of talked about this already, so we'll be quick on this piece. But the first piece that makes the difference is what the father asks of the son. Revenge versus vocation, revenge versus restitution. Old Hamlet's message is retribution, and Mufasa's is responsibility, identity. It's being not so much. Sorry, this is a side note. I don't like the modern kind of be true to yourself. I find that reductionist. But Mufasa's is not be true to yourself, like not live your truth, but be true to who you could be. Become more than you are now. So that's the first thing. The second thing I did want to talk about real quick as well is the presence of a living mentor versus the absence of a mentor. And we can even say bigger than that, a support system. So we've talked about Rafiki a little bit. Nala is another big one. So Nala versus Ophelia. Hamlet has this love interest, Ophelia. And Ophelia is such a tragic character because everyone in the play is just horrible to her. Hamlet, Polonius, Claudius, everyone. And so I'm not pushing this onto the Ophelia character at all. It's not her fault. But Nala is a strong female influence on Simba for good. And so this doesn't really touch on the father-son thing, but I think having the right person by your side helps a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same thing is true about their mothers. Sarabi, Simba's mother, stays in the Pride Lands and fights Scar. She's consistently a stronger character than Gertrude. She does not marry Scar like Gertrude does. She doesn't descend into the bed of incest, as old Hamlet calls it. So
she's part of the resistance to Scar's mismanagement and tyranny of the Pride Lands.
Yeah. So a morally steady support system outside of just the father figure, I think, is a big part of it as well. And the last thing that I think maybe we can talk about, unless you've got more, is Simba and Hamlet's, their decisions and the way that they react to the things, to the variables that are presented to them. I was listening to a podcast today about East of Eden, the John Steinbeck novel.
Yeah.
And the thesis of this podcast was that East of Eden is one of the most offensive pieces of literature to Western thought because in the West, we believe in the inner life changing the outer life. Like you decide who you are who you are, and then that causes you to act the way that you're going to act. But East of Eden, the idea is you act in a certain way, and that makes you into the person you're going to be. And I feel like this is, to some extent, the Simba versus Hamlet piece. Hamlet spends the entire play thinking and talking and wrestling with the inner life and trying to like push what is inside of him out. Whereas Simba, I mean, he's a kid at the beginning, but when he decides to go back, he just goes back. He acts, and then his inner life kind of catches up. He might not be entirely confident right when he decides to leave. You know, he just had one conversation with his ghost dad and the monkey, the baboon, but he goes back anyway, and it works out. So I do think there's something to be said for all of the kids out there who are, or fathers, who are feeling like they don't know what they're meant to do next, to just like start. Just go, just do, you know?
Yeah. I am a firm believer in that. I'm also a firm believer that life is full of starts and stops, and that you often have to pick yourself up off the ground and dust your pants off and start again, because it doesn't always work the first time. And I guess I don't even know if I would call that a caveat. I guess it's simply an observation from having lived through a number of reverses. I agree with that 100% because I don't think that there is a suitable alternative to that philosophy if one wants to be a good person and if you want to have a positive life and have a positive impact on the world around you. I don't think there's any other choice. I did want to make one comment about, I think you made a very important point that I just want to sort of foot stomp about objective truth or values versus living one's truth and, being true to yourself. You know, there's a famous line in Hamlet, in fact, to thine own self be true, and it follows
Mhm.
as, day
It's a
follows night,
Polonius line.
thou canst not. That's a Polonius line. And, actually, that gets cited sometimes as a serious piece of advice to Laertes, but I think most critics would look at that as that whole scene as being full of trite truisms. It's comic relief. I think the whole circle of life song and the whole ethic behind the circle of life, it's actually a pretty important objective value system
Mm-hmm.
that that you know the movie espouses. It's not sort of like, be true to yourself. It's be true to something important,
Yeah.
right? That you
Yes.
believe that
Yes.
that you believe in. We happen to have, as we've discussed, very strong religious beliefs that are dear to us and that inform the way we think about these things. Many people do. Other people have other ways of looking at their values, but those things are objective and they should inform like objective ways that we relate to the world and choose right and wrong. It isn't just sort of how you feel in the moment. Choices should be made based on those objective truths, and those choices should guide what we do.
Yeah. This is maybe Mufasa's most important lesson to Simba. He says at one point, everything you see exists together in a delicate balance.
Yeah,
Everything has a place, everything has a purpose. Choices matter, I think, is the idea here. And we
yeah,
see that reflected. I mean, when Scar takes over, the land, this is an old literary technique, the idea of sovereignty and the link between the ruler and the land. This goes back to like King Arthur. But under Scar, the land rots and dries up and there's no rain and the food is gone. And when Simba comes back, it restores the land to its rightful place because he has this moral code. He has like a system, he makes decisions based on what is objectively right and objectively wrong rather than just whatever gets him power. Or, so that's Scar's, right? Whatever gets him power. He's also rejecting Timon and Pumbaa's Hakuna Matata. He's
Yeah.
rejecting this idea. Like, I was thinking about this a lot. Living his truth as Simba might have been, I just want the easy way out. I'm going to sit in my hammock and eat bugs all day. I'm
Right.
going to treat myself. Yeah, there's a place for that kind of stuff, but he chooses the system that has true good and true evil, and he chooses good. And it's all because Mufasa taught him that
Well,
and modeled it.
and Nala.
And Nala, true.
And Nala reminded him. So it goes back to that support network as well,
Yeah.
because his father was absent and he was able to rely on other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot more here, but I think we've covered the most of the meat here.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah. I would say maybe last piece. It is heartening to me to look at these stories and recognize this is never something I think you want to consider as a dad, but both of these are stories about fathers who die and leave their sons, leave their kids. And it is heartening to me to recognize that in The Lion King, Mufasa, who is, I think, representative of us in this podcast, makes good choices about the people he surrounds himself with. And his son turns out okay. So things can be good even when they're bad.
We've talked before in our episodes about the importance of sort of the fundamental elements of family relationships and how those fundamental elements relate to so many other things, especially when there are problems or challenges later down the road, whether they be losing a child or having, economic challenges or whatever they might be. Building those fundamental relationships early on, talking with each other, communicating, being available, being a small father, as you so eloquently put it, I think. That's the key to having the resilience and the strength of relationships to be able to overcome those things.
Amen to that. Well, thanks, Dad. This was a great conversation.
Man, I can't believe we went 52 minutes. It seemed like we weren't talking that long.
I know, and there's so much more. You get into Shakespeare, and I feel like you can talk forever.
Yeah, that was fun.
All right, well, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody who tuned in to this episode of Fathers and Sons.
Thanks, everybody.